Welcome to the Health Headliner podcast by Tudu Digital. Our content is informational only and not medical advice. Please consult your provider. Now, let's dive into today's headlines.
Okay, let's unpack this. We've all heard it a million times, right? Get enough sleep. It's crucial for your brain.
Absolutely. Sleep deprivation, we know that's bad news, linked to, well, everything from poor focus to serious health problems.
But what if? What if the story isn't just about getting enough sleep? What if getting too much sleep isn't actually great for your brain either?
Yeah, that feels really counterintuitive, doesn't it?
It does, because all the headlines, all the focus, it's always on the dangers of not enough sleep.
But there's this new research looking at data from a really long-running health study, and it's found this, well, surprising connection between sleeping for longer stretches and how well your brain actually functions.
And that is exactly what we are digging into today. We're going deep on this recent study published in the journal Alzheimer's and Dementia.
And there's also a helpful health article that broke down the main findings.
Right. So our mission here is to pull out the key insights, really understand what this research is telling us, and figure out, what it might mean for you and your brain health.
We've got the actual scientific paper, data from the Framingham Heart Study cohort, plus that summary article you mentioned. So let's get into the important stuff.
Okay, so the researchers behind this study, they had a specific question in mind, didn't they? What were they trying to zero in on?
Well, they really wanted to explore that relationship between how long people sleep and how well they perform on cognitive tests.
Okay, sleep duration and thinking skills.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part. They added another layer. They wanted to see if having symptoms of depression changed that connection at all.
So does depression affect how sleep length relates to brain function?
Precisely. That was a really key angle they were investigating.
And who were they looking at to answer this? Who participated?
They used data from over 1,800 adults. These are people already part of the Framingham Heart Study, which has been going on for ages.
And these weren't people with existing dementia or stroke?
No, exactly. A community sample and a really wide age range, too, from 27 all the way up to 85 years old.
Wow, okay. So they could see how these things play out across different adult life stages.
Right.
How did they figure out how much sleep people were getting? Did they use trackers or anything like that?
No, not for this particular analysis. They used self-report. So during regular clinic visits, participants just told them how many hours they typically slept per night.
Okay, so people's own estimates.
Yeah. And based on that, they made 3 groups. Short sleepers were less than 6 hours. Average sleepers, the reference group, were between 6 and 9 hours.
And the long sleepers?
They were the ones reporting 9 hours or more per night.
Got it. Self-report, practical for a large group, but we should probably keep in mind that people aren't always perfect judges of their own sleep.
That's a fair point, yeah. It's a common limitation in these kinds of studies.
Okay, so that's sleep. What about the other side? How did they measure cognitive performance? How well people's brains were working?
They used a whole bunch of tests, a comprehensive battery, actually, administered by trained staff.
So not just one simple score.
No, much more details. They got an overall score, like a global picture of cognitive function. But then they also looked at specifics.
Like what?
Things like executive function, that's your planning, problem-solving skills. They used tests, like the Trail-Making Test Part B for that.
Okay.
They also measured visuospatial memory, which is like remembering shapes and locations. The visual reproduction test is an example there. And verbal learning and memory, how well you learn and recall words or stories, using things like the logical memory test.
Right.
And even verbal reasoning, understanding concepts and relationships, measured by the similarities test. So yeah, pretty thorough.
That definitely paints a clearer picture than just saying cognition.
Okay, and the third piece was depression.
Yeah.
How did they factor that in?
They used a standard questionnaire. It's called the Center for Epidemiologic Studies Depression Scale, or CESD for short.
Okay, a standard depression scale.
Yes, and they also took note of whether people were using antidepressant medications.
Okay, so not just symptoms, but also treatment. Right, and that let them split people into 4 more specific groups, which turned out to be really important.
What were those groups?
So you had the control group, no depressive symptoms, no antidepressants. Then people using antidepressants, but without current symptoms, maybe their depression was in remission.
Okay.
Then people with depressive symptoms, but not taking antidepressants. And finally, the group with both current depressive symptoms and using antidepressants.
That breakdown seems crucial for getting into the nuances, right? Looking at symptoms and medication use separately.
Absolutely. It allowed for a much more fine-grained analysis.
So the moment we've been waiting for. What did they actually find? What was the big headline result?
Well, the big one, the finding that really stands out and maybe goes against what some people assume, is that long sleep duration, specifically sleeping 9 hours or more, was associated with poorer overall cognitive function.
Poorer compared to the average sleepers.
Exactly. Yeah. Compared to that 6 to 9 hour group.
Wow. Okay. So hitting snooze for extra hours isn't automatically making your brain sharper based on this data anyway.
Seems like it, yeah.
And you said depression was a key factor they investigated. How did that play into the long sleep finding?
Yes. This is where it gets really interesting. That negative link between sleeping a long time and thinking skills. It wasn't the same for everyone.
Okay.
It was strongest, most noticeable, in the people who actually reported having depressive symptoms.
Regardless of whether they were on medication or not.
That's right. Whether they were taking antidepressants or not, if they had depressive symptoms, the link between long sleep and lower cognitive scores was more pronounced.
So depression really amplifies that connection. But what about people without depression? Did long sleep have any link to cognition for them?
Surprisingly, yes. Even that control group, the ones with no depressive symptoms and no antidepressant use, they still found a statistically significant negative association between long sleep and cognition.
Really? Even without depression?
Yeah. It was a weaker link than in the depressed groups, definitely. But it was still there in the numbers.
So it's not just about depression, even though depression makes the link stronger.
That's what it suggests, yeah.
You mentioned those 4 groups based on depression and medication. Was the negative link seen across all the groups with long sleep?
Actually, no. And this is another really fascinating wrinkle.
Okay.
There was no significant negative link found between long sleep and cognitive performance in one specific group. The ones who were using antidepressants but did not have current depressive symptoms.
So, antidepressants but feeling okay symptom-wise, and the long sleep link disappears.
It seems that way in this data. The researchers kind of speculated maybe if your depression is well managed, if the symptoms are under control, maybe the long sleep perhaps related to the medication itself, or just how their body is managing. Maybe it doesn't impact cognition the same way.
Or maybe the benefits of having the depression treated outweigh whatever negative association might be there with the sleep length itself.
That's another possibility, yeah. It's complex.
Definitely. It shows it's not just a simple equation. And you mentioned they looked at specific cognitive areas, not just the overall score. Were some thinking skills hit harder than others for these long sleepers?
Yes. For the long sleepers, particularly those with depressive symptoms, the lower performance wasn't just general. They also did worse on specific tasks.
Which ones?
Things measuring executive function, that planning and problem solving. Also visuospatial memory, remembering shapes and layouts, and verbal learning and memory too.
Okay, so quite a few areas affected.
Right. Interestingly, verbal reasoning wasn't significantly linked in the overall group, but that changed when they looked closer at age.
We'll get back to age in a sec.
Yeah.
Did the study find that long sleepers were just more likely to be depressed in the first place?
They did note that, yes. There was a clear correlation. About 44% of the long sleepers in this study also had depression status.
Compared to
Only about 23% in the short and average sleep groups. So long sleep and depression definitely tended to go together in this sample.
Okay. Now, what about the other end of the spectrum? Short sleep. We always hear that less than 6 hours is bad for the brain. Did this study find that?
Well, interestingly,
Yeah.
no, not in this particular analysis, looking at the overall group.
Really, no significant link between short sleep and cognitive performance.
Not statistically significant in their main analysis, no. They actually pointed this out as being a bit different from some other studies that have found that link, so it adds another layer of complexity.
Okay. That is unexpected. Now, you mentioned age before. Did getting older change how these sleep patterns related to cognition?
Yes, they did a closer look, focusing just on the middle-aged and older adults, so people 45 and up.
And what did they see there?
The basic pattern held long sleep linked to poorer cognition, especially with depression, but the negative effects seemed even stronger in the older group.
Stronger how?
Particularly for those who had both depressive symptoms and were using antidepressants. And in this older group, the negative link wasn't just in those few areas. It extended to a broader range of cognitive skills, including verbal reasoning, which wasn't significantly affected in the younger cohort.
So it seems like aging might make people more vulnerable to this potential negative association between long sleep, depression, and cognitive function.
That's what the data suggests, yeah. It certainly deepens the plot.
It really is complicated, isn't it? Sleep, mood, thinking, age, they're all interconnected. So what does all this actually mean? What are the big takeaways or implications from these findings?
Well, I think one key implication is that long sleep duration, especially when it shows up alongside depression, could be something worth paying attention to clinically.
Hmm.
It might be an identifiable factor linked to cognitive outcomes.
A potential red flag, maybe.
Potentially, yeah. Or at least a signpost suggesting potential cognitive vulnerability that might warrant a closer look.
But here's the big question. Is the long sleep causing the poorer cognition? Or is it just a symptom of something else going on?
That is the critical point,
Yeah.
and the study authors are very clear about this. The lead author, Vanessa Young, mentioned this in the health article too.
What does she say?
She pointed out that sleeping longer might not be the direct cause. It could actually be a sign or a result of other underlying things.
Like what kind of things?
Could be underlying vascular issues, problems with blood flow in the brain. It could be the depression itself affecting both sleep and cognition, or maybe other subtle changes in brain health that makes someone sleep longer and affect their thinking.
Right, because this study was just a snapshot in time, right? It looked at everyone at one point.
Exactly. It's cross-sectional. So we see a link, an association, but we absolutely cannot say from this study alone that long sleep causes cognitive decline. The arrow could point the other way, or a third factor could be involved.
So maybe think of unusually long sleep as a potential signal.
That's a good way to put it. Vanessa Young suggested that if you notice you're sleeping unusually long, especially if it's a real change for you, and maybe you're also feeling down or noticing thinking changes, it might be worth discussing with a doctor.
It kind of reminds me of that idea of the J curve with health factors. Like there's a sweet spot in the middle.
Yes. Dr. Winter, a sleep expert quoted in the article, brought that up. The J-curve idea suggests that for many things, including sleep, there's an optimal range.
Usually around 7 hours, right?
That's often cited as linked to the best health outcomes, yeah.
Yeah.
And the curves suggest that going too far below or too far above that sweet spot might be less than ideal for health.
But individual needs vary, of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He stressed that too. 7 hours is an average, not a magic number for everyone.
If long sleep might be a symptom or related to underlying issues, what are some of the possible biological reasons why long sleep, depression, and cognition might be linked? What's happening in the brain?
The paper touches on a few complex possibilities. We know sleep problems and depression often go hand in hand. They can feed into each other.
Right.
Some potential factors mentioned include chronic stress, messing with the body's stress response system. That's the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Okay, the HPA axis?
Yes. Inflammation is another potential player. And then there's this really interesting idea about the brain's own waste clearance system.
The brain has a cleaning system.
It does. It's called the glymphatic system, GLYMPHATIC. Think of it like the brain's plumbing, clearing out metabolic junk while we sleep.
Wow. Okay.
And it seems to be most active during deep, slow-wave sleep. It helps flush out potentially harmful proteins like amyloid beta and tau, the ones linked to Alzheimer's disease.
So how does that connect to long sleep and depression?
Well, the thinking is if someone's sleep is maybe very long but also fragmented, or if they're not getting enough of that really deep, restorative, slow-wave sleep, which can happen with depression, then maybe this glymphatic cleaning system isn't working as efficiently.
So waste products might build up more.
That's the hypothesis. Impaired clearance could contribute to cognitive problems down the line.
So the long sleep itself might be a sign of some underlying issue, maybe related to depression, maybe something else that's also interfering with this crucial brain cleaning process during sleep.
That's one plausible mechanism they consider, yes. They even suggest that long sleep duration could potentially be an early biological marker, maybe a sign of neurodegeneration starting, or a risk factor for dementia later on.
But that's a big could,
A
right?
very big could. They stress that much more research is needed, especially longitudinal studies that follow people over time to see if long sleep really does predict future cognitive decline. We need to know what comes first.
And the fact that they saw a link, even a weaker one, in people without diagnosed depression, that suggests other things are involved too.
Exactly. It highlights that this isn't just about clinical depression. Maybe subclinical symptoms, things that don't quite meet the diagnostic threshold. Or maybe differences in people's natural sleep patterns, their sleep architecture, or their internal body clocks, their circadian rhythms. All these could play a role in both sleep duration and cognition.
Okay, so this study opens up a lot of questions, but it has its limits too. We mentioned the cross-sectional design can't show cause and effect. What else?
The self-reported sleep is a big one. People might overestimate or underestimate how much they actually sleep versus just time spent in bed.
So future studies need better sleep tracking.
Ideally, yes. Objective measures would be much better. Things like polysomnography, that's the detailed sleep study in a lab with brainwave monitoring,
Right.
or actigraphy using wearable devices like smartwatches or fitness trackers that estimate sleep based on movement. That gives more objective data.
Makes sense. What about the antidepressants?
That's another tricky area. The medications themselves can affect sleep. So separating the effect of the drug from the effect of the depression or the sleep duration itself is really challenging, especially in those groups taking medication.
And the people in the study, were they representative of everyone?
That's another important limitation. The participants were predominantly white individuals from the U.S., part of the Framingham study.
So the findings might not apply to people from different ethnic backgrounds or cultures?
Exactly. Sleep patterns, lifestyle, even how depression manifests can vary culturally. The paper actually mentioned that a study in China found different results about long sleep and cognition in people with depression. So we need more research in diverse populations to see how universal these findings are.
Good point. Okay, given all this, the findings, the limitations, where does research go from here? What are the next steps?
Well, number one is definitely longitudinal studies. Following people over time is key to understanding the timeline. Does long sleep come first, then cognitive issues? Or the other way around?
And using those better sleep measures we talked about.
Absolutely. Objective sleep measurement is crucial for more accurate data in future studies.
And studying more diverse groups of people.
Yes, essential for generalizability. We need to know if this applies broadly.
What about understanding the why? The biology behind it.
That's critical too. More research digging into those potential mechanisms, the lymphatic system, inflammation, the HPA axis, understanding how long sleep, depression, and cognition are linked biologically could open doors for interventions.
Speaking of interventions, what are the potential practical takeaways? Does this suggest anything clinicians or individuals could do?
It certainly implies that paying attention to sleep patterns, especially in people dealing with depression, could be an important part of a strategy for maintaining cognitive health.
Maybe more collaboration between mental health and sleep specialists.
That could be really valuable, yes. A more integrated approach.
And what about actually treating sleep issues in this context? Can we intervene effectively?
That's the million-dollar question, really. We need research focused specifically on effective and practical sleep interventions for people who experience both long sleep and depression.
Like, could things like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, be adapted or helpful for this group?
Potentially. We need studies to find out what works. Do existing treatments need tailoring? And crucially, the ultimate question: if we can improve sleep in these individuals, does it actually help prevent or slow down cognitive decline? That's what future intervention research really needs to tackle.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive definitely shows us the sleep-brain connection is, well, more complicated than just get 8 hours.
It certainly is. We know insufficient sleep is a problem, but this research highlights that consistently sleeping 9 hours or more is associated with poorer cognitive function, especially if you also have depressive symptoms.
And it's a tangled web. A long sleep might be a cause, it might be a symptom, maybe both, mixed up with depression, underlying health, maybe even how our brain cleans itself.
Precisely. Lots of interacting factors, not a simple one-way street.
So here's something to think about. Next time you find yourself regularly sleeping much longer than feels typical or restorative for, you say well beyond that usual 7 to 9 hour window, especially if you're also feeling persistently low or noticing your thinking isn't as sharp.
Maybe just pause and consider it. What might your body and brain be trying to signal?
Yeah, really paying attention to your own unique sleep patterns, figuring out what amount and quality of sleep leaves you feeling good and thinking clearly.
And crucially, reaching out for support. If you're struggling with ongoing sleep problems or symptoms of depression, it could be a really important step for your long-term brain health.
Thanks for tuning in to the Health Headliner podcast by To Digital. Like and subscribe for more health news and breakthroughs. Stay healthy and informed. See you next time.